What if a single drone strike on a diplomatic mission didn't just make headlines, but suddenly altered the geopolitical balance of the entire Gulf region? What if everything we thought we knew about stability in the Middle East was just a fragile illusion? For years, analysts assumed Gulf security was contained to puzzles solved by wealth, alliances, and military deterrence. But on day 4 of the latest Iran-linked conflict, that assumption was shattered. A drone struck the U.S. Embassy in Dubai, a global diplomatic hub once considered almost untouchable. To understand the shockwave this sent through international relations, we need to rewind the clock. We need to trace the origins of the current conflict, the escalation patterns, and the missteps that led us here. Only then can we see the deeper lessons hidden beneath the headlines. It all begins with a region long shaped by imperial struggle. The Gulf, rich with oil, strategic waterways, and global alliances, has been a stage for rivalries for decades. Post-World War II, power dynamics placed the United States and its partners at the center of regional security. Key figures emerged: monarchs and presidents, generals and clerics, each pursuing competing visions. At the heart of today's escalation is Iran, a regional power seeking influence beyond its borders. Across the Gulf, nations like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait have balanced cooperation with the West and competition with Tehran. Yet beneath this balance lay unresolved tensions. Proxy conflicts in Yemen, Lebanon, and Iraq became pressure valves for regional rivalry. Militant groups, backed by various state actors, gained both influence and capability. Teasing a twist, this isn't simply about Iran versus the West, it's about how miscalculation and fragmentation can drag even neutral players into the fray. And that brings us to the breaking point. The immediate escalation began with attacks on energy, infrastructure, and allied forces. Drone and missile strikes targeted bases housing U.S. troops, oil facilities, and commercial hubs. Each strike provoked a response, blurring the line between retaliation and escalation. Then, on day 4 of the new conflict, a drone impacted the perimeter of the U.S. Embassy in Dubai, not inside the secure compound, but close enough to challenge the perception of safety. Dubai, long viewed as a cosmopolitan center, now stood literally in the crossfire. Cause and effect unfolded quickly. The strike didn't happen in isolation. It was the culmination of weeks of tit-for-tat actions. Iran-aligned militias saw opportunity with Western forces stretched thin globally. Foreign ministries scrambled. Travel advisories were issued. Embassy staff adjusted security protocols overnight. Public perception shifted. Investors worried about stability in the Gulf Cooperation Council. Oil prices, already sensitive to supply fears, spiked further in global markets. Here's a key twist. The attack wasn't claimed by a state. Instead, an Iran-linked militia group, but not Iran's regular forces, was the voice behind it. That ambiguity is precisely the danger. It allows powerful states to exert influence without taking direct responsibility. It creates plausible deniability. And it makes escalation much harder to contain through traditional diplomacy. In the fallout, several patterns became clear. First, diplomatic missions are no longer off-limits in asymmetric conflicts. Second, state-backed proxy forces can reshape geopolitics without firing conventional armies. Third, global interconnectedness means localized conflict now has worldwide impact. Failed fixes began to emerge almost immediately. Calls for de-escalation were met with competing narratives. Some governments insisted the attack was isolated. Others argued it was part of a broader strategy to weaken U.S. influence. Attempts at back-channel diplomacy were reported, but with no public breakthrough. Meanwhile, social media amplified confusion and fear, adding pressure on policymakers. To make sense of this, let's connect it to modern parallels with data and patterns. In recent decades, we've seen similar dynamics in Ukraine, Syria, and Yemen. Small tactical events triggered strategic realignments. Research shows that diplomatic compounds becoming targets correlates with increased regional instability. According to Council security data, attacks on embassies and consulates nearly doubled during multi-party conflicts. That's not coincidence, it's a repeating pattern of asymmetric warfare. Another modern pattern: state proxies acting where direct confrontation would be too costly politically. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has used allied militias in Iraq and Lebanon for exactly this effect. This allows a powerful nation to influence outcomes while avoiding formal war declarations. Economically, Gulf markets reacted in predictable ways. Oil futures jumped by several percentage points after the embassy attack. Investors moved capital into perceived safe haven assets like U.S. treasuries and gold. Socially, expatriate communities in the Gulf were shaken. Millions of foreign workers from Asia, Africa, and the West suddenly assessed their immediate safety. Families considered relocation plans and consular services were overwhelmed with inquiries. Yet amid this turmoil, one repeating pattern stands out. Escalation feeds itself. Every response, whether diplomatic censure, military readiness, or economic sanction, becomes a seed for further reaction. This isn't linear conflict anymore. It's a feedback loop. In Yemen, for instance, Strikes on oil infrastructure stimulated new recruitment for armed groups. In Syria, foreign incursions prolonged civil war by fragmenting opposition alliances. And today, in the Gulf, drones have become both a symbol and a tool of modern asymmetric power projection. Let's step back and ask, why does a drone strike matter so much? Because it represents a shift in the character of war itself. No longer is success defined by territorial conquest or large armies. Success now depends on shaping perception, economic confidence, and alliance cohesion. A drone can be cheap, but the psychological impact is expensive. The reverberations reach capitals thousands of miles away. This shift challenges traditional security assumptions. Military bases aren't enough to ensure stability. Diplomatic immunity isn't a guarantee. And crucially for global audiences, energy markets are now directly tied to geopolitical stress. The Gulf produces a significant share of the world's oil and gas. Disruption in this region doesn't stay local. It ripples through supply chains, consumer prices, and inflation worldwide. Now let us draw 3 clear takeaways for viewers. First, the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Dubai, ISNT, an isolated headline, it's a symptom of a deeper regional shift. Geopolitical competition in the Middle East now operates through indirect influence, proxy forces, and symbolic theaters of conflict. Second, modern conflict increasingly blurs lines between war and peace. Diplomacy, economics, and security are now interwoven into a complex system where a single drone can trigger market volatility and strategic realignments. Third, global stability is interconnected. Events in the Gulf don't stay in the Gulf. They affect energy, investment, migration, and alliance structures around the world, including here in the United States. Here's the warning and the open question. If diplomatic missions can be targeted with impunity by non-state or proxy actors, what does that mean for future norms in international relations? Can traditional deterrence still work, or has the nature of conflict outpaced our institutions? And what happens next if escalation continues without clear frameworks for de-escalation? These aren't just Middle East questions, they're global challenges, because in a connected world, shockwaves cross borders instantly. A diplomatic crisis in Dubai can affect families in New York, supply chains in Europe, and investor confidence across Asia. As we watch how governments respond, whether through restraint, retaliation, or diplomacy, one thing is clear: the old rules of engagement are changing. Leaders and citizens alike must rethink how peace and security are sustained. And that brings us to the closing thought. Understanding conflict isn't just about knowing who fired a missile or who issued a statement. It's about recognizing the systems, political, economic, and social, that make escalation possible. Only then can we begin to ask the right questions about prevention, accountability, and long-term stability. If you found this analysis helpful, subscribe for weekly updates on global conflict, diplomacy, and shifts in international power. Comment below, what do you think this latest escalation means for global security? And share this video with others who want deeper context beyond the headlines. Because in a world of rapid change, understanding why events unfold is the first step toward shaping a more stable future.